Yeah, it was no surprise. Evan's always been outspoken. We've always kind of known it. I've been writing about it for months, going back how vanilla that offense was and is and likely will continue to be in San Francisco. So the players certainly saw that, and you had two groupings. And I always said, we always talk about Deshaun Jackson and LeSean McCoy, and obviously Shady intimated there was some animus towards race with Chip's decisions. But I always pointed to Evan Matthews because he was always the litmus test. It had nothing to do with race. It had to do with big personalities. And Evan has a big personality. It's a little bit different than those other guys, but it was still the same problem. It was a guy who didn't necessarily always toe the line. You had to go about it a different way and manage personalities differently, and that's something Chip was not very good at. And when you lose Pro Bowl players and you don't replace them, it's an issue. And all of a sudden, a vanilla offense that worked with all pro-level talent, it doesn't work with just run-of-the-mill talent.
Yeah, and, he got rid of Jackson and McCoy and then other popular guys like Macklin and Cole and Foles. Not that those guys were great players, but this was a team that won a lot, John, and I guess it caught up to them that they were rubbing people the wrong way. And I think it's a great story of you could have talent, but if you don't get along or everything is not right from the top on down, that could spill out to the field.
Yeah, and my comparison is the NBA, and I always tell people, as far as X's and O's go, I never met a smarter guy around basketball than Larry Brown. But the bottom line is that Phil Jackson was a more successful coach, not because he knew more about basketball, but because nobody was better, perhaps ever, than managing personalities. And sometimes when you get to the highest level in the sport, we always talk about coaching in the NFL. It's far more than just what happens between the lines on Sunday. And one of the biggest things that you have to do is you got to get 53 different people. And really, when you talk about the practice squad guys, you talk about the guys on injured reserve, it can get up to 70 different people on the same page or as close as possible. And that's one thing that Chip's just not very good at. And I'm not sure. Evan said he hopes Chip takes this constructive criticism and grows from it. I'm not sure if I believe that part of it. But he needs to take the constructive criticism from somebody. It might not be from Evan Mathis, but it might be other people pointing it out. The guy needs to understand at this level, talent wins above all else. And if you got talented players, you got to find a way to make it work, as Gary Kubiak did with the Denver Broncos this season.
John McMullen's with us, 97.3 ESPN.com. LeSean McCoy had a meeting today with the Philadelphia DA. That has been canceled. I guess, that was supposed to be something that did not get out. It did get out. But what does that next step for McCoy mean here? Is he still in some hot water, or is this thing kind of fizzling out a little bit for him?
Well, it's fizzling out a little bit, but the fact that he had a meeting with the district attorney tells you there's something amiss and something going on. So they need to discuss certain things, whether that's how he's going to be indicted, if it's not going to be a perp walk or something of that nature. That's some of the times when you have high-profile defendants, they sort of work things out behind the scenes and say, okay, he's going to be arrested, he's going to come in. He's going to be booked, and then he'll be released. My guess is something of that nature. But the longer it goes, Seth Williams, the DA in Philadelphia, there's a possibility that nothing comes of it. And the fact that it did leak to the media indicates that you have a guy, and he would hardly be the first DA in the country who sees a high-profile situation and wants to take advantage of it as far as media coverage goes.
John, let me get your thoughts on this NFL story that they withheld millions from their players, and what kind of impact that has, if any, that on obviously the commissioner Roger Goodell.
Well, it's not going to have any impact on him. We've seen. I mean, there's far bigger issues than that guy's Teflon, and a lot of it is because the owners understand that he takes the criticism that they would take. So they use that and say, okay, just blame it on Goodell and we'll move forward, and this will be another example of that. This one, though, and I wrote about it today on today's Picks Again, I think people – I always say when it comes to the NFL, automatically bet on ineptitude and ineffectiveness. It's not a conspiracy. They weren't trying to withhold $120 million from the players on purpose. If you think about it logically, this is a $10 billion industry. That's a pittance. It's about $2 million per team when you cut because it's a 50-50 split. Now, what would the NFL owners, most of them are billionaires, what are they going to gain by trying to steal $2 million from the players? I think people just need to take a step back and look at things logically. From a football sense, the bigger aspect of this is the salary cap's going up another $2 million. So instead of $9 to $12 million, now we're talking about $11 to $14 million. And when you bring that back down to Philadelphia, makes it more likely because you have a little bit more space that the Eagles can bring back Sam Bradford.
A lot of NFL news with John here as we take a look at some of the storylines. How about the news here on Tony Romo, where he is leaning towards undergoing surgery on his left collarbone, John? It will be what they call the Mumford procedure, which is having a portion of his clavicle shaved off or removed. It's going to be the third time for him. He's going to be 36 in April and now likely to miss a big chunk of the offseason program. Is there some concern about Romo if you're a Cowboys fan?
Well, there should be. As you mentioned, he's 36 years old. And we talked about it late last season when he came back. I thought that was one of the worst decisions the Cowboys could have made because it was pretty evident that he was susceptible to getting the re-injury. That's exactly what happened. And if you think back to it, Mike, there wasn't a big upside to it. The Cowboys would have had to basically run the table to make the playoffs. It wasn't going to happen. So it's just another example of bad decision-making by Jerry Jones. And this is an organization that has to look seriously about finding the heir apparent. You hope Tony Romo can still be back and healthy for next season. But even if he is, you have to come to the realization that he is 36. He's far closer to the end of his career than the beginning. So you have to start thinking about tomorrow, or at least the day after tomorrow.
Yeah, and you had mentioned a lot that they kind of rushed him back. Do you think that could play a factor in his recovery from this? This is the 3 times that he broke that left collarbone there, and I think Cowboy fans and a lot of people are just taking for granted that he comes back and they automatically shoot themselves back up to the top of division. John, 36, I'm not so sure that they are a guarantee to just go from 4 wins all of a sudden back to 12.
Yeah, you're right. And remember, it's not only the clavicle, it's the back injury, which has been persistent over the last number of years. He's got that to deal with. You're talking about a team that's already got Randy Gregory suspended. We it was a concern. There was a guy who was a potential top 10 pick. He fell to number 60 in the second round for a reason, and the Cowboys understand that now because he's going to be suspended for the first 4 games of the season. There's a lot of issues going on with that team. They still have to make decisions on Greg Hardy. They still have to really, really solve the running back position long term. So, yeah, it's far from a guarantee this is going to be automatically a 12-win team again if Tony Romo is able to play 16 games.
Yeah, and you mentioned Hardy. Stephen Jones insists that they have not made a decision about him, but your thoughts on Hardy?
Well, I think it's more likely they bring him back now that they realize Gregory's not going to be there for a month. And if you have any sense, you will understand you can't count on Randy Gregory at all moving forward. This is a guy, people need to understand that the substance abuse policy was changed when they collectively bargained the HGH testing into the policy. And when they did that, it became very less strong on marijuana. So basically you get a 2-game fine when you fail a first test, a 4-game fine, and then a 4-game suspension. So the indication that he got since the combine, last year's combine, Randy Gregory has failed 3 marijuana tests and 4 in total because he failed one at the combine.
Unreal.
So if you think that guy's going to keep at this point and say he's going to stop and he's not going to do it again, that would just be another example of the Cowboys being a dumb organization. So they might have to bring Greg Hardy back because they need a pass rusher.
Yeah, Stephen Jones said he is concerned Randy Gregory's substance abuse could lead to more suspensions in the future. And as John mentioned, he has failed 4 drug tests in the last year, and this was a guy that was banned for 4 games already. When they drafted Gregory, I kind of said, good. I'm glad they took him because I felt it was going to be a wasted pick. He just seemed like a troubled guy, unfortunately for him, but no surprise there. So a lot of Cowboys news as the offseason kind of ramping up here. We're going to get free agency in a short amount of time here, John. And I was looking at the free agent areas. Safety one spot where Eric Berry at the top of that list, Eric Weddle on that list, Reggie Nelson on that list. You wonder if that's an area where Philadelphia might be willing to spend some dollars in free agency to find that. We talked about Eric Rowe. They don't really have a guy on the current roster, Philadelphia. Would they be willing to spend a little money in free agency? Would that be their big splash at that spot? Because there are some interesting names at that spot in free agency.
Well, I think it's a possibility, but I think if that's your thought process, you'd rather bring Walter Thurman back. A, he knows the team, he knows the city, and B, he's not going to be as expensive as those names you mentioned. And really, if you think about it, there's little question Eric Berry's going to go back to Kansas City. Reggie Nelson came out today and said he wanted to be back in Cincinnati, so I don't see him moving. So it really comes down to Eric Weddle, who's had a number of issues with the Chargers and probably is going to move on from that organization. But that's a big-ticket item. And I just don't think the Howie Roseman mentality, which is really an extension of the Joe Banner mentality, is to go out in free agency and splurge like that on a player. When you got a guy who's already been here, has already been successful, you probably get him for a little bit less. And while I say that, I'm not sure, as I've stated in the past, the Eagles can bring Thurman back because I think they're going to look towards a younger player, whether it's a draft choice, whether it's trading down from 13, getting the second pick, whether it's taking a guy in the 3rd round, or whether it's moving Eric Rowe. All these dominoes have yet to fall yet. But I don't think if people are getting excited for names like Eric Weddle, I don't think that's the way the Eagles are going to do business this offseason.
All right, we're going to focus more on the Eagles offseason. One big one is, of course, Sam Bradford. Jason Cole of the Bleacher Report in his insider section believes that Sam Bradford has a good chance now of staying put in Philadelphia, and that has a lot of implications because he thinks that maybe a lot of teams aren't going to be bidding very much for Bradford's services and that the Eagles might catch a break there if, in fact, they want him back.
Yeah, and if you remember on the show yesterday, I heard the same thing, and that's the buzz going through the league is the fact that I don't think Tom Condon is going to be as happy as he thought he was going to be. I don't think there is going to be a bidding war. I don't think Sam Bradford is getting near $20 million. And if he stays in the 15, 16, 17 range, I think it's much more likely that he comes back to Philadelphia, and that's why you see sort of this shift in thinking. And that's sort of what Cole reported today. I think it's definitely a possibility, but I think it's going to happen before free agency if it is going to happen. I think if the Eagles re-sign Sam Bradford, it'll happen before it starts. If he gets on the open market, I think it's a clear indication that they're not interested in bringing him back. And it's interesting draft-wise. Mike Mayock had his annual conference call with reporters today. And he's got quarterback as the number one position the Eagles need to address at number 13 overall, whatever they do with Sam Bradford.
Yeah, that would be interesting as, if they signed Bradford for more than just the franchise tag and then still drafted a quarterback number 13, is that a good move? If you sign him for 3 years and you take a guy at 13.
I've said for a long time, I don't think Sam Bradford is the long-term answer. So I'm not going to say it's a bad move. I find it very hard to think, though, that you could spend, we'll just throw a number out there, say $17 million. I find it very hard to believe you could spend $17 million and then draft a quarterback in this type of environment at number 13 overall, because this isn't the old NFL where you can wait for guys for 3-4 years. It's basically maybe you can get away for a year, but you need to get that guy on the field by year 2. So I'm not sure that part of it makes a lot of sense, but the mentality behind it makes total sense. And that's that, Sam, it just isn't the long-term answer. And at some point, this organization needs to put its foot down and say, we're going to try to find at the game's most important position.
Yeah, and as we talked about yesterday, John, that Doug Peterson said it's best for a rookie to grow in his system, that, he wants to shelve him for a year. But I think that Bradford contract is really one of the bigger stories going on. That along with Cousins, but I think Cousins seems like he's more locked into Washington than Bradford is to Philadelphia. He was drafted there.
Yeah, and Jay Gruden loves him. And as I said, Jay Gruden, in essence, put his entire job on the line betting on Kirk Cousins, and it worked out well for him. So I think both of those guys have a lot of loyalty to each other, and they both like each other, and that's the realization that at some point both sides will get it done because both sides don't want to move on.
All right, John's got plenty more on the NFL. Of course, the Combine is this week. We'll touch more on that on tomorrow's show, where we're going to see some of these quarterbacks and probably get a better feel of them by the end of the week, where, of course, this is a very interesting draft at number 13 for Philadelphia. John McMullen at JF McMullen on Twitter, and always at 97.3 ESPN.com. Thanks, John.
Hey, thank you, Mike.